gets a goal? Who got the assist? Who got the assist?
Hello, everyone. Well, this is exciting. Yes, it's the most wonderful time of the year. So we've both hit our wildcard buttons in tandem this time round for the first wildcard. Last year, I think I did it on a random Tuesday. We ended up podding on a Wednesday. But hey, both done it this time. And ready to hopefully kick on after a bit of a topsy-turvy start to the campaign. Lots to talk about, so I think we should probably get on with it. Joined today by Sam, as always, who I think is as excited as I am about this pod. We haven't yet seen each other's drafts, so, I can't wait to dig into this one, basically. All right, mate? How are you?
Yeah, very good. And you're correct. I'm extremely excited for this one. Obviously, so many people are on wildcard this week. It does seem like fever has hit the very maximum it could possibly be right now. And both of us have been infected by it as well. So yeah, really, really interested to see how you line up, because we genuinely haven't seen each other's drafts yet. We even had little grey squares over our wildcard drafts in the template before going live. So yeah. It's such nerds and such a little peek behind the curtain of how we set up things before we get going. So yeah, very interested to see how you are looking, Tom. In the meantime, we are Who Got the Assist. On today's pod, as I'm sure you can imagine, there will be a lot of wildcard chat, of course, and that will take the centre stage. However, we are going to try and assist all FPL managers today, and not just those on a wildcard, as we know situations are going to be very different across the board. And quite a few of you won't be watching with a wild card being used this week. This means we'll take a bit of a step back and audit as far as we reasonably can without talking for 3, 4, 5 hours, because I know we both probably could today. So you might find we miss out on a player or two, but of course, just let us know in the chat if you're watching along live, if there's anyone in particular you want us to mention, and we'll try and get back to them. There just simply isn't enough time to go through every single one, I'm afraid. There will be the tiers of FPL options out there at the moment across the price points to help both wildcarders and non-wildcarders alike. And we'll use our wildcards as a springboard for that. As Tom mentioned, we haven't seen each other's drafts, so this is very exciting. And of course, we'll discuss those in just a moment's time. Then we'll get into the Game Week 6 preview more specifically, and as usual, go into best captains, bold claims, and the best transfers in. It's Monday, the 23rd of September, no Monday night football, but League Cup and European games in the midweek, so important to timestamp as always. In the meantime, though, shall we have a look at the game week reviews?
Yes, indeed. Let's do that. So, signed off my old team with a very, very small green arrow. I think we're talking like 20K or something like that. But all good, really. A 68 overall for me. It wasn't. I think the whole week sort of hung on, as I said last week, Conser scoring a goal. And hey, you know what? He did. It's quite a moment, honestly. I think I saw a friend of the pod, Snake FPL, said that he did a knee slide and ran around his living room when the Conser goal came up on the notifications, and I did something fairly similar. I scared my daughter because I was like, yeah, and it's just amazing the kind of how little things like that can really just create all these sorts of emotions within you. So yeah, that was pretty good. Captain Salah with just the assist, unfortunately. Trent with the 11 owes a massive debt to Koiveen. Hope that's right, Anthony. Kelleher in goal for Liverpool for saving what could have been known goal. And God, I don't know what that would have even been, like an 8, 9 point, no, whatever the swing would be, maybe double-digit swing that would have been from Trent. So thank you very much, Koiveen. Nice assist, nice goal for Smith Rowe. Pair of assists for Rodgers. Finally come good, Sam. Finally. Hopefully he'll be 5.6 for the start of the season, and he's such a vital man, isn't he? If you are wildcarding, or indeed if you're sat there with 2 or 3, 4 free transfers at the moment. I mean, he just enables so much, doesn't he, around the place. Haaland with the goal. I benched Munoz second, so he didn't come on, and said Arogbanam came on for Diego Jota. A bit frustrating from a greedy point of view, but from a kind of initial thoughts point of view, why I did that was just because I thought Man United would score, and they really, really flipping should have, really. That first half was diabolical from Palace, and the casualty of that first half was sadly Mateta. So I just thought, well, 1 week punt. I didn't think Izat was going to play. So I kind of thought, well, okay, I'm just going to go with my gut on this one. And I just thought that Palace would have more about them versus United, to be quite honest, and didn't quite transpire that way. You win some, you lose some. I'm a free transfer down now on you. So it'd be interesting to see if there was a butterfly effect from that at all. But hey, I mean, these things happen sometimes when you do take a punt and it doesn't quite pay off. You kind of just dust yourself off and move on. And I was wildcarding, so all of that swiftly became muted in my brain. What about you?
Yeah, so slightly worse week than you, which seems to be typical so far this season. 4 points off, so 64. Very, very slight red arrow. It was pretty much grey. I think I went down by about 10k places, just outside the top million. So very little damage done. But of course, saved the transfer, kept Isak on the hunch that he might start. He did. Didn't exactly do anything, but at least I got the one call right there and got the 2-pointer. So yeah, very frustrating, and I won't be looking to own him on a wild card this time next week. Across the board, not too many really awful performances. The one big letdown was Minte not starting. So again, at least he started the first 4 of the 5 game weeks for me, or at least most of them. So I got most of what I needed out of him when I needed him, at least. And then obviously didn't exactly block any points on the bench either. It would have been a 1-pointer no matter what. So can't really be too upset about that. Rodgers, like you say, finally came good. Smith Rowe coming in with an 8-pointer. I have actually already sold him on a wild card, little bit of a spoiler. And I'm wondering whether or not that was actually the wisest thing to do, to get rid of him so hastily. I have looked back at him since thinking, oh, maybe he could have just about survived. I think there are better options out there for the fixtures coming, but Smith Rowe doesn't have a bad run, and he has been very decent value for money. So one I'll probably ponder and maybe possibly regret. Obviously, Raya was a box office performance. Very unfortunate to concede in the 97th minute. I think he would have been on for a couple more points, obviously, if so. And yeah, Captain Salah, 12 points. Pretty disappointing, and could have saved the transfers a couple of weeks ago. Obviously, Eze and Salah were my 2 transfers in last week. Neither of them have really done anything since buying them. So I could be sat here on 4 free transfers right now and loving life going into a wild card. Alas, that is not the case. But either way, I've got 2 free transfers coming out of the wild card, and we get to have some fun this week.
Nice. I mean, I think everyone's kind of, who went Salah in game week 4, that thought process has kind of crossed their mind, but I don't think there's a world that you'd never have not done it. I just don't see that world, really. So
I don't want to be hindsighty about it.
Yeah. I'm not saying you are, but it's one of those things. It's definitely worth observing. But it's one of those things that you can't really beat yourself up about. I mean, it would have been nice to have those 4 free transfers, and in my case, it would have been nice to have not done a 1 week pump. But sometimes you've just got to go with your gut if the moment strikes, and kind of you've got a bit of an allowance there, I suppose, to do so. Cool. All right, let's do it. Time to look at our wild card side by side. Chat through where we are at the moment, and also make a discussion on a few bits and pieces. As Sam mentioned, we'll use these as a springboard this main discussion this week, which is tiers of players and where it all stands at the moment. We'll obviously post these drafts on Twitter for those not watching on YouTube, and I'm sure we'll talk through them as well. Should go without saying, but obviously these are provisional, and these will stay on the screen throughout the entire chat as reference points if you're watching on YouTube. So,
we're all taking it in right now. So.
Should we kind of go through? I think I'm on the left, aren't I? So by default,
you are, yes.
But I suppose I go first. So I mean, there's definitely a few decisions that I've made here, which are markedly different from where you've ended up, effectively. But basically, it's in the 352 at the moment. I'm actually 0.1 million short right now. I had to kind of do a little bit of alteration on FPL.team, because sadly it kind of was giving me a wrong number. But I'm 0.1 million short where I am. I'm sat on a few different players at the moment. So I'm sat on DCL, I'm sat on Nicholas Jackson, and I'm sat on another player whose name escapes me, Luis Diaz. Just to kind of see how kind of those sorts of it's basically trying to get a profit out of them, and I might keep them. I might keep that team, but as it is, here is where I am. So Raya, obviously not going anywhere, and Fabianski's second goalkeeper. I don't really care if a 3.9 million goalkeeper does turn up anytime soon, then that would be absolutely fantastic. In defence, it's Trent Alexander-Arnold next to Gabriel at Arsenal. So Arsenal double defence, keeping Trent. Pinnock is there alongside Milenkovic from Nottingham Forest, who I should be able to afford by the end of the week in terms of price rises, and Leif Davis. So 4.5 million defenders, all of which kind of have quite complementary fixtures. They also link in with somebody else who I mentioned in just a minute. In midfield, I have a few others. So I've got 3 players who I don't really justify: Saka, Rodgers, and Bumo. Rodgers perhaps now ensconced as a playable character rather than an 8th attacker. I think that's kind of perfectly clear, perfectly fine. Semenyo, who is also in my team. So he was the one who came in for Smith Rowe. He actually has come in for Smith Rowe already. Dropping him was tough. Smith Rowe, I do love the man, but I feel like they're running into harder fixtures. And I think that I can always come back to him. He's not one of those players who's just so out of reach that it's impossible. Once you've sold him, it's over. It definitely isn't. It's just one of those that I think at the moment, the short-term kind of fixtures for Semenyo, Southampton, Leicester, I think it is, do justify that. I'm one of those Arsenal fans, by the way, Sam, who rigs the Fulham Man match competitions whenever Smith Rowe is on it to ensure he always wins it. I just always do it. Semenyo is there. Not that it matters, but he's taken the second most shots in the Premier League so far. He's actually 1 below Haaland, I think it was. I think it's ridiculous. 6th for non-pen XGI. I was listening to Planet FPL and I was putting the baby to bed earlier, and as always, very glad to hear that James seems to agree with my assessment. I said last week that I've been scouting him, that he's genuinely a really interesting attacking threat. He's got like kind of good shooting technique and all that sort of thing, and it's really good fixtures for the next 2. And Davis, Milenkovic, both of them kind of rotate alongside Pinnock over the next kind of few weeks. So there's some combinations which I'm not going to go into because it's boring for everyone. But between 8 and 10, there's kind of ways in which I can cover for Semenyo's sort of dodgier fixtures, which taking the likes of Arsenal away. The final pick is Phil Foden. So a wild card has to be a bet on the future as well as a bet on the present. Is how I kind of looked at it, Sam. Anyway, I've currently got Luis Diaz sat there, as I said, and I could of course stay with that. But Foden going forward, in my mind, is 2 things, right? He's only going to go one way, which is upwards. He's only going to get better this season. He's not really made an impression on the season thus far. But that's not going to be the case unless we have some sort of annus horribilis akin to like a Rashford. I don't think that's kind of quite the case. And at the moment, he's at a discounted price, an Uber differential, and is at the start of a very good run. I know that there's obviously more information to be gained there, etc., and so on and so on. But I think that at the moment, he's one of those players, and I was speaking to my friend Alex Ball about this. Shout out to Alex, who definitely made me kind of think about it a bit more. But I basically really love including him on the wild card as a legitimate pick, looking down the line 1 or 2 weeks when, say, he starts returning, everyone will want a piece, and I'll have him there for that. The margins of gain in FPL are so small now that if you do have a character like that who is, I guess, not too far, it won't take very much for a bandwagon to start, and he's more than capable of provoking that bandwagon for his performances. So he's in there right now. That makes it a 3-5-2, which means that up front you've got Haaland. I'm not going to brook any argument about him. Screw your reviews. Solanke is in it at the moment. It could be Solanke, it could be Jackson. I've got Jackson at the moment. Just not too sure on him nor his minutes. But I completely appreciate the next 2 games are fine. I do think Solanke will now be up and running, and I really don't mind the upcoming fixtures for Spurs. I can't quite reach Watkins due to Foden, of course, but again, there could be some configuration there. That this is just the sort of wild card that I'm showing you. I've got 4.5, which is Stewart. I doubt we'll ever need to play. This overlooks a Vardy or a DCL. I said I've got DCL in my sort of my current value accrual team. I don't think I'll be starting with DCL. I think that if that does happen, I'll just kind of probably get Stewart anyway and just have the money in the bank. So yeah, 3-5-2, bit of rotation, but importantly, kind of a good mix of established players, players who are in the template, plus a couple of flair picks maybe in Foden and Davis, perhaps, which suits me and gets me excited. But obviously it's Monday, there's a few days to go, and I know there's some buts. So there's no Chelsea attacker in this, there's no Liverpool midfielder in this, there's no Porro. That's kind of where I am at the moment. I really like it. It was the one that I had been sort of looking at I mentioned a few weeks ago, I was on jury service, so I had loads of time sitting around, and it was this sort of team that I was at, with Luis Diaz in there, rather than Foden. But I really, really like the Foden punt, effectively, which I'm sure we'll dig into in a little bit. But hey, there we go. I've spoken enough.
Right, well, we can either go straight into my wildcard draft and then we can compare notes, or we can start assessing some of your picks, Tom. Which would you prefer?
Sorry, what was that?
Which would you prefer? Go through your picks first, or should I go through?
Oh no, go for
as in
yours.
we assess your picks, or go through mine first?
I'll go for yours first, I think, and then we'll kind of discuss.
Okay, let's do it. So in goal, we do have a difference. I've gone with Flecken at the moment. I will explain that. But that comes in combination with my back three. So Gabriel, Saliba, and Trent Alexander-Arnold. With Davis, so we do have that in common, and Wout Faes on the bench. So I've got a little bit more depth than you. I've got 8 strong attackers rather than 7, and I do have the 5 strong defenders as well, or strong enough to actually play if I really, really needed them to. So that's one difference. If I was to go into the reasoning behind Flecken at the moment, as a combination with Saliba rather than Raya with a Pinnock, for example, the number one reason at the moment is because Arsenal's fixtures do turn in 3 game weeks' time, and I do like Porro at that moment in time. I also potentially like the option of a Man City defender. At the moment, I'm not that confident on Lewis that I would want him on my wild card today, but I would like the option to get to either him or Porro quite easily in a couple of game weeks' time when Arsenal's fixtures do turn. If I go with a Pinnock or a Collins, who I know is also popular, and have Raya in goal, I am more locked into an Arsenal double up defensively for a longer period of time. I think that's great, by the way. I don't think there's an issue with that. And I've got another draft that I'm very close to picking. It was 50-50 or 51-49 between the two to go on screen today. The reason I like this one very, very slightly more is, one, it means that if Flecken gets injured, I do have Valdimarsson on the bench, so I've got that backup. They've got great fixtures as well, although it is worth noting that Flecken himself is not the best keeper. But it also means that in a couple of game weeks' time, I can get rid of Saliba or Gabriel if, for whatever reason, he becomes an issue, and I can bring in Porro or Lewis with absolutely no issues whatsoever. So moving into midfield, we've got 4 out of the 5 same, so I won't go over them in too much detail, but those 4 are Saka, Mbeumo, Semenyo, and Rodgers. Now, the difference between our drafts here is that I've got a 4-man midfield this game week. That won't be the same case every week, but Rodgers is now first on my bench. That's a difficult call, but that's one I'll think about more during the week. This is more just to showcase the 15 in general. Ipswich away for Rodgers is obviously a good fixture. I could easily end up starting him. Eze is the difference. So Eze I've got in instead of a Luis Diaz, who again in my other draft was in, but with the sacrifice of 1 or 2 others. But I also still have high hopes for Eze. I still think that he will come good. He's been unlucky, and even without the locked-in penalties, I think he is talismanic for Crystal Palace to at least a certain degree. And I think that he will return very, very shortly. And for 6.9, I still think it's a price that you can carry him a little bit every now and then if you absolutely have to. It also means that I've got an 8th strong attacker. That 8th strong attacker, and the one difference between us in the forward line is I've gone for Chris Wood rather than burning a spot. So that means that I can rotate a little bit. I am a big fan of having a 3rd striker because I think there are a lot of good options there. And I don't want to lock myself into needing to make a double switch if I had a 4.5 million striker down the line, where let's say a João Pedro or a DCL start looking really, really tempting. I don't want to have to sell a Solanke to do that and burn that spot. And also, I don't want to have to find 1.2, 1.3, whatever it is, million to get up to one of those players as a 3rd striker option. I'd much prefer to have the combination in situ, and it's that price point locked in where I can just make one move to transfer across to the other. Chris Wood, though, very happy with him. I'm being pleasantly surprised by how many minutes he's been getting, and his performances in general as well so far suggests to me that he's probably not that close to losing his place anytime soon, and Awoniyi probably isn't going to dispose of him in the next few game weeks. Wood's fixtures also looking great. And crucially, as we now know, the brand new information from Game Week 5 is Chris Wood is on penalties. So that's an added bonus. And that makes a significant difference in my eyes, and very, very marginally puts him ahead of João Pedro, who doesn't have great fixtures to come, and also DCL, who, let's face it, can be sporadic at the best of times. So that's pretty much my 15. It does mean that all 15 of my players, well, 14 of my 15 players would start matches every single week, and therefore I can rely on them without needing transfers through injury. There is a bit more depth, but it means there's also a little bit more quality in that extra midfield spot that you've managed to squeeze in there with Phil Foden. So very interested to see which people prefer out of these two, and also how many changes there will be between now and the end of the week for both of us.
No, that's good. I'm not particularly surprised to see there's a few commonalities. I do think there's kind of a few sort of big questions and a big sort of set of different decisions. So as you mentioned, you quite liking Chris Wood versus me taking that entire spot out to ensure I can get 5 across. I do think I'll go for a 3-5-2 no matter what. I think that it will either be Foden or Diaz. Basically, I don't really I quite like the idea of just kind of making it work that way almost. I'm surprised you've given up on our boy Raya. But I mean,
that was the 49. That was the 49 versus 51. I'm very close on him.
No, I think your justification though makes complete sense. I just think after what we saw in the Man City game, principally, that it's one of those where I wouldn't be surprised if Raya does reach that sort of fabled season keeper status, which may, it may happen with him. But other than that, I think a lot of the core sort of players, I'm just trying to do a quick tally in my head here, but a lot of the core players are sort of in there, aren't they? What's that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's really boring for the audio. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 in common, which is probably about where I'd have pegged it, to be honest. I'm sure that there'd be a few sort of bits and pieces that would take us to similarity. A few questions from the chat, which needs to be just kind of address that are common to both of us. Eddie Guna says, why no Salah? That's my only question. Obviously, that's something that's just been coming up a fair bit in discussions throughout the place. Why a wildcard is getting rid of Salah? What is the reasoning behind that? And I suppose neither of us have Liverpool midfield either, which is kind of a bit of a major but I'm surprised that no one's kind of shouted Cole Palmer's name at us either, but we'll address that during the rundown, the tear off.
We will,
but I suppose, Salah wise, I just kind of, I don't know. It's one of those where obviously I acknowledge what a great player Salah is. This isn't like a tacit dismissal of what most Salah is. The thing is that I think that most of the time you can only really afford 2 in terms of players who are premium in the attack, and I think over the short term those are Haaland and Saka. I did have a look, Eddie, and those asking at Haaland, Saka and Salah or something along those lines. There's no removing Haaland. I'm just not going to be doing that. So I did look at kind of, am I able to kind of get away with potentially Havertz rather than Saka and things like that. Fundamentally I just didn't like it. And I think that's absolutely fine as justification, because I think that there's a wealth of evidence behind why Saka is a good FPL pick. And I think kind of the difference, and why didn't wildcard last week, for example, as well, was just because that extra 2 million finding that diminished everywhere else. And it just makes everything a lot more difficult to do. You could also remove Trent, for example, and just go with a 5.0 or below. But again, I felt like that devalued the defense a little bit too much. So it's just a trade-off. It's one of those sort of unfortunate trade-offs, and it's always going to be a but, and that's the beauty of the pricing this year. That's kind of my justification. Is that kind of where you are?
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. Someone, obviously I posted a video on my own channel yesterday about basically the first wildcard draft I made, and someone made the very good point, like, why do you think Salah is going to not outscore Saka over the next few? And that's not really why I'm doing it. It's because I don't think he outscores him by enough to make it worth the extra 2.5 million when I can use that very well elsewhere and bolster more than one other position. And I think they make up the difference, especially because Saka is a very reasonable captaincy shout in at least 2 of the next 3 game weeks. That's not to say he's a locked-in captain, though. And I think if 1 or 2 factors do change, i.e., Haaland becomes the very, very obvious standout captaincy pick this week. Probably the only way that really happens is if Saka is a fitness doubt ahead of game week 6. If that happens, then I think this all shifts across quite a lot, and maybe managers start scrambling to find that 2.5 to upgrade Saka, or slightly more than 2.5 actually now, to upgrade Saka to Salah. The problem is at the moment, that extra 2.7, I think it is, maybe 2.8 million, goes a very long way in other positions, especially in defence at the moment. And to spread the best part of 3 million across 2 or 3 positions there will make a very tangible benefit week on week. So I think that's the problem at the moment. And like Tom said, there's just no way I'm going without Haaland right now. So that squeezes the budget just that little bit more. Yeah. And I quite like a deep 15. I saw someone mentioned in the chat, I don't know who it was exactly, but someone mentioned the Christmas period upcoming. And I think that's another point. I do want to be well set there, because wildcards are meant to last for quite a while. And if I'm trying to squeeze in Haaland and Salah, as I've done in the last couple of weeks, what became really, really clear is I'm relying on a lot of the 5 million and 5.5 millions to consistently start and consistently perform in any weeks that Salah or Haaland don't absolutely explode. And I think over a short period of time, that's fine, and you can get away with it. Over a longer period of time, i.e. on a wild card, and you don't have another wild card for another 12, 13 game weeks, I think it becomes a little bit more dangerous. And obviously we have transfers, but we're trying to save those wherever possible. And I think with Saka's fixtures, as long as he's fit, he's close enough to Salah that for me, it's worth the money.
Yep, absolutely. Makes a lot of sense. I think it's one of those where I think kind of you can overplan it a little bit. I mean, my wild cards, as I mentioned, through having 4.5s rotating, all this sort of nonsense. I know it's nonsense, but I think there's definitely enough in there. So, for example, Leaf Davis, I was speaking to Paul FPL Tractor, who's FPL Planet FPL's Ipswich correspondent and friend of the pod, Nick Maynard on Twitter, and I think we all had the similar sort of idea. Obviously, they come from a bit of a biased point of view as both Ipswich fans, but the idea was that he's basically sort of a defender 3.5. Like he could basically turn to a bit of a Doughty, or a Matt Doherty from a few years back. Sorry, Irish people, where you can, if needed, play him in any fixture as things progress. If he does sort of deliver on what looks like a very promising sort of start to his life in the Premier League, prefer him over Greaves as well. I know that a lot of people are looking at Greaves, and a lot of people are also suggesting Vandenberg as well for a 4.0, which I'm not interested in. I spoke to Tom Med, who's Planet FPL's Brentford correspondent, and he wasn't particularly sure about that one either. Hindi Monkey in the chat has asked why aren't we interested in Bowen? I think that's another one to just quickly mention. Neither of us have got him in. I don't know whether it's short-termism with the West Ham performance not very long ago, but I don't know. It's one of those where there's just a plethora of options, and for whatever reason, unless you're really fixated on the player, he's just elbowed out, really. So I think he's sort of like 6th, 7th pick right now, even though he is obviously talismanic and all that sort of thing. There's a lot of revolution, progression going on at West Ham. There are the fixtures there in this draft. I've got Foden. I may have a Luis Diaz if I don't start with a Foden, and it would mean that I could reach Bowen fairly comfortably if that was the way it went. But honestly, it's just one of those where, again, you've got to make trade-offs, and he's just not made it. But if you really fancy Bowen, PJ, then you go and buy Bowen and enjoy all of the individual unique rewards that could engender. And I really enjoys him too. What about you?
Yeah, I summed it up well. I don't mind Bowen as a pick. I just think there are 5 better options, and specifically 2 or 3 at his price that you'd probably favour over him personally at the moment. And Mbeumo, Diaz, and even Eze as well, I would probably prefer over Bowen. I think mainly just because West Ham look like a team in flux right now. And with the fixtures to come, I'm sure they'll get there. And maybe he'll end up being a bandwagon, as he mentions in the chat. But I think for now, with Mbeumo's certainty, penalties and minutes, and the fact that he's playing in more of a well-established side at the moment without so much flux, I'd prefer to minimise the risk there. And he just seems like such an obvious pick to me right now that I just can't find room specifically for a Bowen. It would have to be for that Eze/Diaz spot. But looking at it, I think I do genuinely still prefer either of those two over Bowen, very, very marginally. So yeah, I don't think he's a bad pick by any means, but I'm not quite making it in for me just yet.
Cool. And the final question in the chat from Tom Armitage is: Would really less sporadic than DCL? I think he's quoting something you said there, Sam. He had a terrible miss after the penalty. Tom says, albeit offside. Don't like the Forest attack short term without Gibbs White, who was sent off for trying to derail João Pedro's comeback, wasn't he?
Yeah, I don't mind so much about the Morgan Gibbs White thing. Obviously, the ban is a problem, but I think they've got enough about them to survive without him for a week. So I'm happy enough with that. Was it a straight red? I can't actually remember now. I think it was 2 yellows.
Second yellow, yeah.
Yeah. So it's just a 1 game week ban. That's fine. So I can just about make peace with that. It also locks him in as a penalty taker, doesn't it? So that's absolutely fine. I mean, it's not a very, very obvious call between him and DCL. You could easily go DCL and it could pay off. I just think that, again, Nottingham Forest look like a more well-oiled machine than Everton generally, and I think they're more likely to create more significant and better chance volume for Chris Wood than Everton are for DCL right now. On the underlying data, he's ahead right now as well. Obviously, a bit skewed by the penalty. But I'm more optimistic about Forest's prospects, and I do like the fixtures to come. Everton's are obviously good too for an extended period, so don't let me usher you off of DCL. He is a good pick in his own right. I just marginally prefer Chris Wood with that new information of the penalties added in.
Fair play. And Uncle Press, final question: where is Rico Lewis in all of this?
Well, Prass, if Prass recommends Rico Lewis, then I suppose I'd better put him in, to be honest. I do like him, and obviously the Rodri thing does change things. We were talking about this in the DMs earlier, and he could become a nailed-on pick. For me, though, I just need more security on the minutes. Walker's a threat. Gvardiol on the other side is a threat, obviously. So I just don't feel certain enough that I can rely on him when I'm going to need him. And looking at my side right now, the 3 that I'm regularly starting, I'm happy enough to start every single week. And Davis coming off the bench, if there's ever an issue, seems perfectly fine to me without having to worry about the rotation. And you just know that the week that I'm going to want Lewis to start, there's going to be an issue. And it just feels like I need that added depth to cover off Lewis. Maybe there are ways and routes that I can have him in and feel more comfortable. But as it stands right now, as I mentioned at the start of or nearer the start of the show when revealing my wildcard, I prefer 2 more, maybe 3 more game weeks of information on Lewis, see him starting more regularly now that Rodri's out. And then I can make a move for him when Arsenal's fixtures stiffen a little bit for Saliba. And at the moment, it's a 50-50 call between Porro or Lewis coming in for Saliba in a few weeks' time.
Yep, exactly the same. I think that there could be definitely an option to go there, and the beauty of the price is obviously clear. It does feel like you need to see where it goes with City, really. I mean, we definitely had a situation until kind of Guardiola added a bit of embellishment on it last year, where the defence was FPL non-entity effectively last year, wasn't it, for an awful long period? And in fact, I think even though kind of Guardiola did very well towards the end, they kind of still were. And it makes me kind of wonder, especially with Rodri's absence, exactly what that defence solidity will look like. He's classed as a defender, of course. I know in football terms he can play wherever, but the core of his points will come from defence and FPL, not, of course, diminishing what he is as a player. I'm sure it won't be very long until the red top media call him generational, because obviously he can acquit himself in any position with the prowess of a veteran, which is very rare, and I'm very glad he's English, frankly. But at the moment, I know it's a bit of a cause célèbre for some in the community, like our friend Flapjack and things like that. But right now, it's just doesn't quite work for me. He says with Ethan Pinnock in his team. But if anyone does listen to Guardian Football Weekly, you'll know exactly why he's in my team. Put it that way. Right, so that's kind of the wild cards as they are. And I've liked listening to your justification, Sam. I'm very glad to say that I feel like I'm maybe quite set in where I'm going. So it's not, even though your justifications are very point point heavy and they make a lot of sense. They're not swaying me, which is probably a good thing actually at this moment. But we'll see what happens come kind of Thursday or Friday when you've worn me down, and we may both find ourselves with Chris Wood. Let's turn to tiering very quickly. Well, for the bulk of this pod actually, because there's quite a few things to discuss here, just in terms of both us as wildcarders and also for those with 2, 3, 4 wildcard transfers to make. Exactly how are you going to cope with this mini swing? It's a mini swing that people like Praz have been signposting for quite a while. And it's something that I suppose we're all going to have been planning for, at least those in the engaged community have been planning for quite a while. So I think it was just worth having not a pre-season pricing level style look, but a look nonetheless at the different tiers of players and possibilities out there. As Sam mentioned, there is not ever in any world the possibility we'll be able to go through every single player, which could be potential. Kieran in the chat is obviously mentioning Evan Nilsson and things like that. I did have Evan Nilsson in a couple of drafts actually, but that's an example of the kind of player that someone may really, really like and may not possibly get on the roster for this one. Goalkeepers at the moment, I can definitely empathise, Sam, with the perception that you don't want to be paying more than 4.5 million for a goalkeeper. I can 100 million% understand that, and I was saying to you, wasn't I, like even before the last pod of preseason, that there's no way I'm spending that on Raya. There's no way in hell I'm paying premium for a goalkeeper. Last time I really liked it was David De Gea, all those years ago, but since then it's just been a big waste of time, mainly due to Ederson. Although there was a time when Ederson was very good for me, but for me, I still think that Raya is. I don't know. Can a goalkeeper be informed? Because he is, and Arsenal's defence obviously elite, and 0.5 million next, 0.4 now if you're buying him fresh. But the cheapest way into the Arsenal defence, it seemed to me like a bit of a no-brainer. Cheapest way, Timber aside. So I mean, that's where I am with this. I do think that if you. I don't know whether you'd be making a goalkeeper transfer. If you've got 4 free transfers, then maybe this would be part of it, to be honest, because he is honestly just a set and forget, as I said earlier on. But you've given consideration more than I have to Flecken, who is a goalkeeper who makes a lot of saves, but is also a goalkeeper that I don't know. If I was a Brentford fan, I'd be flinching an awful lot when Flecken's facing any kind of shot, to be honest. Where are you with that? Would you still be pushing people towards Flecken or something? I've even seen Flecken for Bruggen being something which is kind of on the roster for some.
I mean, if you want rotating keepers, I think those two do rotate pretty well. But talking about the Flecken versus Raya debate, obviously, I think those are going to be the 2 most popular keepers on a wildcard this week. And as any listeners know, I was very hot on Raya going into game week 1. So please don't think that anything I'm about to say is to say that Raya is a bad pick. I love him. There's a 49% chance I end up with that version of my wildcard draft at the end of this week. So I'm not dismissing him. However, what I would say is for all the reasons I liked Raya in the first 5 game weeks, I like him ever so slightly less for the next 3. Those reasons are I expect less saves and therefore less chance of claiming the bonus points. I also expect an added threat in front of goal for Gabriel and Saliba through set pieces. Now, obviously, that is not a massive threat. But as we've seen, they do very highly prioritize set pieces. And I can see that continuing over the next few game weeks. If even one set piece goal comes from either of those 2, I will be up on the deal by having Gabriel and Saliba over Raya. Mainly because, honestly, Southampton are not going to have 3 shots. So he's not going to get an extra point, especially on target. So I'd be very surprised if he gets any more than a 6-pointer against Southampton. Leicester will probably be very similar. You'd expect at home that he might have to keep 3 or 4 as a maximum. So again, we're looking at 6 or 7 pointers those game weeks. That's very good. That's not something that you should dismiss a keeper for, even at 5.5 million. But if I've got double Arsenal defence anyway and they keep the clean sheet, I'm taking a bit of a gamble on the fact that I might be able to get something more out of a Gabriel or a Saliba, perhaps even bonus points without having to make the saves that Raya would need to make to get to those bonus points. So I think the upside's there for having the defenders in these game weeks. Again, that's not to say that Raya's a bad pick, but I think in combination, it also gives me the ability, and I think this is really important, to move across very easily to a Porro or a Lewis in a couple of game weeks' time, or perhaps even a Gvardiol as well, without having to worry about having double Arsenal defence for quite a few weeks, or have to worry about getting rid of Gabriel, basically giving myself that decision to make. Or, of course, getting rid of Trent, which some of you might be more open to doing. At the moment, I'm happy enough to leave him in for quite a while because he's been phenomenal. So that's my reasoning on why no Raya at the moment, or the argument against Raya. The argument pro Flecken would be very simple. It's a fixtures play. They've got great fixtures for a very long period of time. And if there's an injury, I've got Valdemarson as the backup keeper on my bench as well. They're not the best defensively. They're not bad defensively. Flecken is obviously a below average keeper from the expected shots conceded or expected goals conceded metrics, but he's not so far below average that he becomes an absolutely awful pick. And I'm hoping that on balance, just by setting for getting him, I can gain the additional points elsewhere. Now, like I said, it's a very, very marginal call. I'm kind of playing devil's advocate here, but I do like this combination. I think it gives me that extra depth in defense. I like having 3 very strong defenders in my current system at the moment, and having Davis come on if there's ever a need for panic or rotational injury, whatever. I quite like that too. So I'm fairly happy with it. I'm also not that far away from preferring your draft as well at the back, Tom. So yeah, I don't think for one second I would dismiss that either.
No, it's tough. It is very tough, as a former member of this parish would say. And I've definitely looked at it. I've looked at a draft with Saliba and Gabriel. I've looked at a draft with Porro, who we'll discuss in a second. It just doesn't work for me in the same way it does with Raya, because you said you've got the good fits up until game week 13. Then what? You know, whereas with Raya, it's like, well, okay, I'm done. I don't have to worry about this anymore. But I know you've got more. You'll then have 1 million more kind of liquid cash that you can play with. So that's again another consideration really for going with the 4.5 over Raya. Effectively, it's a little bit like Haaland. It's a sunk cost, isn't it? Where you're kind of taking that amount of money pretty much out of circulation for your team, and it means you're just playing with a few of the little bits. I know that for example, Mark Southerns is saying was saying that, you know, you end up, if you do kind of follow the template, which I don't think we have entirely, but I think they're definitely kind of strong shades of the template around this, that if you kind of just follow the template, then you end up kind of just messing around with kind of 4 or 5 picks and the rest sort of stays solid. And that's definitely a consideration, but equally, you know, I'm still kind of in the phase right now where, you know, I quite like points. So there you go. Right, moving on to defenders. I don't think it's worth discussing Trent. Really, I think it's very much kind of where you are with him as a player. Gabriel, I think it's not worth discussing either. I think he's surely the one right now. I do like what you said about Mr. Saliba and doubling up there. Good point was made by James on Planet that potentially Gabriel could use as a decoy, and Saliba might do a few goals now. Actually, on Trent, it's probably worth just kind of throwing in very quickly for the analytics slaves. I mean, analytics fans out there, that he is not included in the FPL review set draft for a wild card if you were to slavishly favor going down that route. For me, I think he's one of those again where if he was 8 million, I think there'd be more of a question about him, but given how he started the season, the role he's playing for Slot, it just doesn't feel like it's worth going against him. And it kind of also helps, neither of us have got Liverpool midfielder at the moment, and it kind of helps kind of salve that potential burn.
For sure,
Seeing him as a 7 million defender, who's basically 7 million Liverpool midfielder, effectively. I know that sounds a bit stupid, but it's one of those that kind of just helps you a little bit mentally with dealing with the fact that you're missing. There's a but about your team.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we were so hot on Trent at the start of the season. He's one of my bold claims to go big this year too. And nothing I've seen so far has put me off of him whatsoever. I think for the next two at least, he's still a very, very good pick and arguably could be a season keeper for me. You could have a play around with the fixtures after the next two. Again, they're away from home, but it's against Wolves and Palace, I believe. So I'm not too worried about that. Liverpool look much more solid defensively than last year. That will be baked into the review data a little bit at the moment. Obviously, their defensive output from last year, and it might take a couple more game weeks for it to like properly catch up to them being a very sturdy defense, if indeed they end up being that. Obviously, as we talked about on the pod with Simon at the start of the year, review tends to get those sort of things right more often than not. So maybe we're making an incorrect call here, but I've got a strong assumption that they're more control based under slots. And I think that really favours Trent in both the build up and in the clean sheet capabilities too. So I don't want to go without him if at all possible. And like you said, it's quite nice to just have some Liverpool representation there, even if the fixtures aren't looking amazing over the medium term.
Yep, no, I'm right behind that. Sounds really good. Cheaper defenders then. Let's go there. So we've kind of actually no. Let's talk about Porro very quickly. So neither of us have him at the moment. I think that the key issue with Porro, obviously the upside is clear for all to see. Lots of shots effectively, but the downside with Porro is clear to see that players like him have been penalised very strongly by losing 4 BPS per goal conceded, and also Tottenham's ability to keep clean sheets is perennially under question. One to come back to, I think I've remarked when it comes to Slanky, and you also echoed it, that their run is actually not that bad. Apart from Man City in game week 12, there's nothing really that worries me offensively. In fact, it's Spurs. There's nothing really that worries me offensively, full stop. It's just defensively, that's the only thing. And not going with him, I think just kind of helps release that small amount of funds that kind of just makes a dibbling into a Semenyo effectively, with a few other bits and pieces here and there.
Yeah, pretty much agreed. I would like the option of getting to him in a couple of game weeks' time, as I've mentioned several times already, because the fixtures do soften even more after game week 6 and 7 away at Man United and Brighton are out of the way. Then there is a really good run all the way through to game week 16. So yeah, I could easily see myself back on him and doing a little bit of a hokey cokey with that Saliba spot. And then also potentially opening myself up to Raya by the time we get to game week 10, I think, when their fixtures take another turn for the better. So yeah, that's something I could look at doing. But yeah, for the time being, I think he's just about made it into my sort of option B draft at the moment. But for 5.6, if they're not keeping clean sheets in the next two, then I prefer to have the option to get there in a couple of game weeks than go with him from the off, especially because Arsenal and Liverpool's fixtures are great. So I don't really need to worry for the next two.
Yeah, absolutely. Cheap defenders, quite a few kind of going on. I think maybe the best 5.0 is probably Dallo, actually, as a bit of a sideline. I think nice.
Yeah, I like Dallo. Yeah,
looking all right. But criteria for cheap and for picking cheap players in the 4.5s, it just has to be kind of fixtures, doesn't it? There's no other way around it. That's why I'm sat with in this draft Pinnock, Milenkovic, and Davis. And Davis. No, Milenkovic actually at the moment is actually Mikalenko in my kind of the draft I've really got, just because 4.3, he's the best value 4.3 by a long way if he is fit, unless Dyche gets sacked by the freaking group, which could happen. And under Gareth Southgate, could he be who knows? And probably end up playing a right back, left back, won't he? Southgate. But anyway, yeah. So picking cheap players, I think it's just fixtures. And I think you mentioned this earlier, and it's definitely something that's been in my mind as well, Sam. There's definitely a question with these cheap players. What's their Christmas like? Oddly, that feels like something that is going to play a big role if you're wildcarding or making these moves, not on wildcard with a lot of free transfers, playing a midi wildcard, as my friend JP likes to call it. Because you're less likely to want to, bit like a goalkeeper transfer out these 4.5 million defenders, right? So you have to be looking at quite a wide time horizon with them, don't you?
Yeah, you do. I think you need to be comfortable having them for a longer period of time. I don't think you necessarily specifically need to be looking at each of their Christmas run just yet. We're still a fair while away. And because we can build up transfers, I think a lot of us, by the time we get closer to Christmas, will start thinking to ourselves, let's just keep 3 or 4 transfers in the bank if at all possible in case of crisis, because it will be handy around that point in time. But it is something to monitor. And if you really want to plan ahead and you really want to be safe, then looking at those Christmas fixtures could be an interesting way of playing it, especially if you're not planning on starting them for the next few game weeks and you don't mind them having a few worse fixtures that you're benching them for the next 3 or 4 weeks. Longer term, they might balance out, and it might be worth just holding on to a player, knowing that they'll come in handy, having them up your sleeve at a later point. With that being said, though, my favourite, and I'm kind of annoyed that it's yours as well, is Leif Davis at the moment, because I thought that would be a difference on our wild card. Thought it's been kind of fun and interesting and quirky there, but clearly not. I really, really like him. I think Ipswich have shown a lot already this season, and I think they'll be a slightly underestimated team on the whole for the first few weeks. And I think they're going to keep getting better week on week. They're a very well-coached side. And I think under McKenna, they will continue to improve week on week and create more chances down that left-hand flank for Davis. That being said, I'm not expecting to start him very often, but it's nice to have up my sleeve if I need him. There are a few other options, like you said, though. Konza as well, Mikolenko, Robinson as well has gone up in price, but has been very decent so far this season. And you could look at Collins at Brentford if you weren't too enamoured by Pinnock as well. And of course, our best friend, Lewis as well, could be a very interesting pick if he becomes completely nailed in.
Yeah, I think it's definitely one of those considerations that you've got to just maybe come to later on. Maybe, you know, with the rolling up of free transfers, I think that maybe there will be a time when you're like, okay, I've got 3 free transfers, and my 2 or 3 4.5s aren't quite working for me. I'm just going to use one here. I don't think it's kind of the end of the world, really. Right, midfielders, as I said, whistle stop tour. Premiums, we've discussed Salah already. Saka, I'm not sure that that's really worth going into here, Sam. But I think Palmer is. So, as I said earlier on, I'm surprised that no one's kind of saying, but where Palmer? And I think he's definitely one of the more reluctant omissions from my wild cards. I definitely have had a draft with Palmer and Saka and Haaland. I do like it, but I just feel like something is amiss with it. I'm not really too sure what it is. I don't know whether it's the fact that maybe, you know, I'm enamored by the idea of Foden at 1.3 million less, or I'm enamored by the idea of what Palmer frees up, or, you know, if I do end up with keeping Jackson, the fact that Jackson may well, quote unquote, cover, match, be able to kind of at least kind of make me feel better about having no Palmer. Nick, formerly of his parish, it's tough fame, has Palmer, has Watkins, and he was saying earlier on that on our Slack that he was just really happy the fact that Palmer doesn't seem to be in the wildcard template for a lot of people, just because obviously there's unique points for him, and definitely kind of made me think again, right, is there any way I can get him in? But there's just no way I can really make it work. Maybe, you know, if I took Slanky down to a João Pedro or something along those lines, Illiman and Die.
Like too much sacrifice, doesn't it?
Yeah. But equally, if you are really besotted by Palmer, you can make a Palmer, Saka, and Haaland draft work, can't you?
You can do it, and another way you could do it is releasing Trent. If you're not as hot as on him as we are, you could save the money there and upgrade that your current Foden spot, or potentially with a little bit more wiggle, I could maybe upgrade the Eze spot to a Palmer if I really, really had to. But looking at Chelsea's fixtures, I think they're underratedly not that great. I mean, 2 home fixtures, fine. Brighton at home, Nottingham Forest at home. Forest have been pretty good defensively for a long time, and Brighton haven't been too shabby either. I expect Chelsea to do fine in those games, but if Palmer's getting subbed off on 60 to 75 minutes like he has been recently, I think I need a bit more from a 10.5 million asset to make that worthwhile, especially with all of the other sacrifices I'm making. And then after game week 7, it's Liverpool away, Newcastle at home, Man United away, Arsenal at home, which like, look, you could argue that Chelsea could score against most of those sides, but are you expecting 2, 3, 4 goals in any of those? Maybe 1 or 2 of them if they're very lucky. And for Palmer to be on the end of the majority of those, which he would have to be to make him worth the money, I'm just not sure that's going to be the case. And I'm a little bit scared off of him by the fact that they are, or the way Maresca's talking is very much as if there are 2 good players for every one of those attacking positions. And he knows which players are going to sub on for which players in any given match. And having someone like Joao Felix, or Felix, I think is the correct pronunciation technically.
It's Felix, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, coming off the bench for Palmer. He's not signed for Chelsea not to get any minutes. And Maresca has by name said he is the alternative in that spot. I'm just a little bit worried about the minutes going forward. And I can't afford that kind of worry on such an expensive player when the fixtures just simply aren't as good as Saka's over the next 3, for instance. So I think for me, unfortunately, he's a no right now. I'm, for the same reason, off of Jackson pretty much altogether right now. I know a lot of people are very warm on him. We'll go into him in a minute, but same sort of reasoning applies, I think.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a bit off-putting with Chelsea generally, isn't it? I don't know, although the price rise, they had to do it based on last year. They had to put him above sort of, 9, 10. Otherwise, everyone would kind of have started with him, or at least kind of he would have been easy to get to. It definitely presupposed a continuation, and I don't know whether there's enough knowledge in the body politic, basically, about how Maresca is utilising Palmer at the moment. I think I've watched 2 Chelsea games, and it's definitely been the case that it's not quite matched up to how Palmer was running the show last year in a lot of ways, at least in an attacking sense.
He had more freedom last year, I think.
Yeah, I mean, Maresca is a kind of very heavily wedded to a particular system of heavy possession, isn't he? And I think that's kind of what we're seeing a little bit. And it feels like, as you kind of rightly acknowledge, that there's a bit of a disparity between what he costs versus the value you may get from him. So it's a tough one, but he's not quite in it at the moment. I've mentioned my reasoning for Foden. I'm not going to go into that again. In the sort of semi, don't know what's that like an American, but there we go. The semi premium sort of bracket as well. There's Bruno Fernandes, a friend of the pod, Mitchell Sterling. I was just talking about this amongst friends earlier on, and he cited the example of how mapping companies put phantom streets on their apps to smoke out copycats. And he suggested that Bruno might be FPL Review's version of that. It made me laugh a lot because you can definitely tell an analytics manager if they've got Bruno and Eze. And I don't know. I've given my view on Bruno already, that I think that maybe he's
harsh on
a little bit of an all fart no poo sort of character. I think that he's kind of he's a charter, whereas Eze is kind of just like kind of a quiet pop. But I mean, even though United are coming up with a good run, and I'm sure that he's going to be dual from here on to infinity, he's just one of those who's just never crossed my mind, honestly, as an inclusion here. Really, I'd be more likely to be looking at Garnacho really when he becomes fit. Probably my brain's been warped by how much James from Planet loves Garnacho. But I think we were saying last year as well, towards the end, that this year is going to be a bit of a bandwagon. Although admittedly, kind of he's been in and out of the team. It just feels a bit. I don't know. Something's missing with Bruno. I'm not sure what it is.
Yeah, as a Bruno owner for the last few weeks, I can't help but agree with you. Very frustrating to own. And there is an element of FPL's meant to be fun. So having Bruno can at times be maddening at the very least, and sometimes more than that. So yeah, I'm not really considering Bruno at the moment. The data is there. And look, I mean, Review, obviously you've bashed it a little bit there, but to be balanced, the reason Review likes him is because the data is good, and historically over a long period of time, he does tick all of the boxes, as it were. He's on some set pieces, he's on penalties, he gets 90 minutes, good data, blah, 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 blah. But it is Bruno. He continuously underperforms, like you mentioned, and tried to warn me about at the start of the season. And I just think for the main reason that there are other players that are cheaper than him now that are also on penalties, that are also getting near 90 minutes and are also getting very similar data and also performing on that data. I think there are just too many reasons to go for him at the moment. And I think even the most cold-hearted, analytical-based managers at the moment would be hesitating very slightly on him, considering some of the other options we have at a cheaper price and what those options would then enable elsewhere. So yeah, unfortunately on Bruno, I think he's a proper good buy for me. Obviously, I sold him a couple of weeks ago anyway, but I did initially consider having him in. I just don't think I can really go there again as it stands. I'd have to see some consistent performances to actually even consider him again.
Yeah, I know the feeling. I think, I'd be really favouring Garnacho, and I'd be looking at a way to potentially get there with one of my midfielders at some point. It does strike me that obviously I don't really have that way quite with this to kind of make that move, but yeah, I mean, it may well be, as I said, that I end up with a bit of money in the bank and Luis Diaz in Foden's place and money to play with, and that's absolutely fine. I do like to prefer. I do prefer like a maxing wild card, like getting that wild card that no one else can afford, etc., etc. But I think we've kind of already done that with a lot of the key players' price rising, so maybe that kind of isn't really a scenario we need to worry about. There is a player that Ross FPL Raptor was mentioning on the old Twitter bot. James Maddison, great underlines again. Not in either of our teams right now, obviously. But I don't know. Are we being sold a pop once more with him? is a question, because I think he definitely fits the bill again as a player who could be really interesting for wildcarders, as one of those who's not been particularly favoured in the zeitgeist, but still performing okay in the underlying data, and obviously looking fairly effervescent if you do watch Spurs play.
Yeah, I have to admit, Madison's one that's been creeping into my thoughts recently. I didn't answer Ross's message on Twitter because I already knew the answer, that he was very, very high on the expected data, and he had come into my thinking a little bit. And it would be for that Eze spot. Obviously, I'd need to find some money to do so. But I really like him. I like Spurs fixtures. He is tempting me a lot. I think the only thing going against him in my mind at the moment is, one, I don't want to be overexposed on Spurs. And if I'm going Solanke, it does feel like I'm putting slightly too many eggs into one basket there, when forward and midfield spots are quite valuable. There are a lot of good options out there. And secondly, like, it's not a fixed rule for me because, as you can see, I've got quite a few players here that do get a fair amount of assists too. But I tend to have a bit of an aversion to players of that sort of price point that just don't really get the underlying XG in comparison to the XA. And he seems to not really be taking the amount of shots that with high XG chances in a Spurs shirt that I would really want of him to be worth that spot in my team. I'd love to see the data on it. I haven't dug into it, but I know that he's very good on the expected assist data. I think he's a bit lower down on the XG data, and he usually is for that sort of price point too. So that would be my one hesitation with him. I don't think he's a bad pick, and he is in my thinking, especially if I don't go with Solanke. But yeah, I think that might just be one or too many other good picks at that price to just put me off of him for now.
Yeah, there's lots going on in the fun zone, isn't there? Effectively, I mean, I'm as I said with I know your reasons for picking Eze. I mean, he's definitely always one of those players who, as I said, isn't quite on the Bruno Fernandes level of, you know what, mate, I'm done with you. But he's kind of one of those where it's going to take a little bit for me to pick him, and I'm kind of quite content about his price and so on and so forth. But there are loads of players, effectively. I just want to pick up on one who has been mentioned quite a few times about the place, who's Dwight McNeil. Now, this is a player who I think has been in the Premier League for an awfully long time, awfully long time. And I feel like once a season, the name Dwight McNeil crosses everyone's desk, you know, and we all kind of look at him for just a microsecond, and we think, "Oh my God, what a player! he could Lingard it, he could Almer on it, and if that happens, fair play if you've gone that way. But there's just no way I'm gonna fall for it again. Is where my brain is on this, Sam. There's no way in hell I'm going to be going there with McNeil. It definitely, I can't remember what it was. I think it was a few years ago where he just got no returns all season. I think one return despite playing over 3,000 minutes. I think maybe it was one return.
Yeah,
He's
I think it
just
was
that
the
sort of
season before
player.
last.
Just so, just all fart, no poo. Magnified to a huge, hospitalized due to constipation.
That's a horrible image.
So it's just not for me, really. I don't know. I mean, have you seen him being mentioned around the place? And is he anywhere near your thoughts?
I have seen him mentioned quite a lot. No, he's not near my thoughts, I have to admit. Again, he's a bit like an extreme version of Maddison, where it's almost all assist threat. And whilst that's great, obviously assists do matter. They don't matter anywhere near as much as goal threat does for a midfielder. And it's Everton. If I'm going to go with Everton, I'm going to go for the one player that's actually getting in front of goal and likely to score some chances. And that would be DCL. So yeah, McNeil for me, whilst he's at a decent enough price, he would be, in my mind anyway, far too inconsistent for me to back and feel comfortable with. And I just know, because of my, maybe it's bias or but general just views on him, all it would take is 2 blanks in a row and I'd want to use a transfer on him. And that's a mindset thing more than anything else, but that does matter when making these decisions, because if you know internally that it's not going to take much for a player that we know to be inconsistent at a cheap price to want to be a transfer out for you, you're basically going to be booking in a transfer immediately. Whereas with a player like Semenyo, who's currently in situ at that sort of price point, I'm actually fairly comfortable with him for a longer period of time. And I think it would take an injury or a serious regression for him to be someone that I need to get rid of or feel like I need to get rid of very, very quickly. McNeil, I don't think it would take much more than a blank or 2 for me to be like, nope, not worth it. I'm getting rid and burning it and using a transfer on him.
Yeah, I feel you. Tyler Dibbling, go.
Let's go. I love him. I love him to bits already. 3rd youngest goal scorer in Southampton history in the Premier League. And if you are going to go for a 4.5 million midfielder, i.e. a strong 7 and an 8th attacker being that 4.5, I honestly can't really talk you out of it. It does make sense. And when he scored the goal, I would be lying if I didn't immediately open up some FPL team and FPL hub, all of that stuff, and try and see whether there's a good draft with him as an 8th attacker that gives me extra power elsewhere. I think if I'm being balanced though, and the reason that he's not in at the moment is, quite frankly, Southampton are just not going to score that many goals. And whilst he is a very promising young player, we do have a very deep squad this year. We've got a lot of options in those forward areas. And for the same reason, I'm now completely scared off of Armstrong or Brereton Diaz or Archer, any of these players. I'm equally scared off of Dibbling, because I think all of them will only take a poor performance or 2 to be out of the side. I mentioned a few of them there, but we've also now got Ryan Fraser. We've got Cornet as well. There's just so many different combinations that we could try in those forward areas and in midfield now as well, quite frankly, that I just think if he's your 8th attacker and you don't need to rely on him that often, I think it's fine. And he might end up being a consistent regular starter with good upside. For me, it's just too early to tell right now, and I'd prefer to make that decision in a few game weeks' time once we've seen him string a few 70-plus minute games in a row and maybe see a bit more of a consistent goal threat. Because at the moment, we've basically seen 1 or 2 good runs against Man United and 1 or 2 decent shots against Ipswich, and that's pretty much all we've got.
Yeah, but still, I think probably the optimal 4.5, isn't it? If that's the way you're going. If you're on making free transfers this week, you need a 4.5 enabler. There's no other option, honestly, with him.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, much better as an option than Winks.
Yeah, I've definitely looked at that as well as like you've got to really. I'm not a big fan of Ross Stewart's takes into the forwards, but I mean he's getting minutes effectively. I saw that a Flapjack on Twitter was saying that he's going to rise tonight. I think that's definitely just Wildcards is pissing about, to be honest. anything else. But I might have to jump on that if it looks like he's going to rise, because it's getting quite dicey in my setup. So forwards wise, let's go to the top. Haaland, let's not waste any time here. Let's not bother with that.
What is there to discuss?
Sorry, but if you want a Haaland draft, you come to the wrong pod. Planet FPL, very good. Go and listen to them. Strikers 2 and 3. I think Watkins probably is one again, which is kind of in the reluctant omission category, really, for us. But should probably be one that I was very high on him throughout the course of preseason. Was always looking for a way to bring him in. It almost feels that it's just due to, and we didn't cover him earlier on because we've already kind of discussed him, and I don't know what else there is to say about Brendan Rodgers. But Brendan Rodgers. Oh god, there's nothing to say about that guy. Awful. Why would you have a bloody portrait of yourself in your living room? Jesus Christ, what a main character energy. So that's one for my Gen Z fans. Morgan Rodgers, though, I mean, he just by existing kind of, I guess, again, makes you feel better about not having Ollie Watkins almost, doesn't he? Because unless there may be a Watkins mega haul like we saw last year, it could happen where he scores like 22 points one game. But becomes the tail end of a very good run of fixtures for Villa now, and it feels like, I know you've got Rodgers bench this week and you're set up, for example, Sam, but it does kind of feel like Rodgers is one of those who, a bit like Cole Palmer light, basically, because he's not going to quite do what Palmer did, I don't think, but it's still going to be just such a handy sort of Swiss Army knife sort of pick. Could be playing for you, could not. Enables so much more for you, and it kind of also means that you're kind of all right not having Watkins and exploring the other options that a more sort of mid-price forward lets you kind of go with mid-price forward, lets you unlock.
Yeah, and I think it's also worth noting that Rodgers, whilst he's a very good option in his own right, I think the strength of Rodgers, in my opinion, is that you can kind of rotate him more easily. Than obviously you can't really do that with a Watkins. And I've got quite a nice rotation going with Semenyo as a 7th/8th attacker that I quite like for the next 4 game weeks at least. Whereas with Watkins, you're starting him no matter what. And whilst that's not necessarily a problem because it's Watkins, he can score against anyone, if he's still not on penalties and he's about to come into fixtures around Champions League football as well, with the likes of Spurs away and Liverpool away, Crystal Palace at home and Chelsea away as a run of 4 in a few game weeks time, that's not absolutely ideal for a striker. And honestly, I think at 1.5, 1.4 million less, whatever it is right now, Solanke kind of matches him up in an equally attacking, if not more attacking side, with, I would say, probably quite parallel goal threat or expected goal threat for my money anyway. I do expect Watkins to be very good, but again, where are you finding that extra 1.5 million from? I just don't know where I'd be able to grab that. And Rodgers does, like you say, make me feel a little bit better in the weeks where Villa have a really good fixture. I can bring him into the side. Obviously, you're kind of starting him anyway, and you can kind of sit back and relax a little bit more knowing that, okay, no forward player can cover another forward player, but it does look pretty likely that Rodgers is going to be the one assisting Watkins so far. We've seen a lot of missed chances from Watkins from Rodgers' assists, and we've now finally seen one where he's buried it. So I think that's going to continue. I think he's going to keep getting the assists for Watkins and maybe Duran's goals as well. And now McGinn's out for a little while as well. I think he's locked into. So I'm happy enough just having him for now.
Yeah, he's been so close to points basically the entire time, which is why it's been kind of like, hold. It'll be okay. So it's very nice to be rewarded. So we've gone at the moment in our teams with Solanke over Jackson. Kieran in the chat said that he was very disappointed to see Solanke in my team, which is a fair comment, to be honest. Obviously, as the huge gooner that I am. So Jackson is one of those where, as I said, I've been scouting him fairly recently and watched the highlights of West Ham too. Don't have BT, so I had to watch the highlights. Not paying that corporation any money. But I don't know. With Jackson, it feels like he's been consistently good at getting those chances, but his conversion has. It was really awful to say this, but shades of Nunez about him. And he's been aided a lot by bad defending, it seems, especially versus West Ham. Like the first goal, they just let him run through. You haven't seen it yet, I'm sure, Sam, but they just let him basically just keep running. You know, on FIFA when you're running on down one of the flanks, and they kind of move out to kind of cover all the cross options. They just let him run basically, like a clear run at goal and put under Areola. Probably should have done best, to be fair. And the second goal was just kind of poor mark and good finish by him, though, to be fair. So I'm in two minds about him, but I think the X-Mins is what kind of sways me towards Solanke, as well as the fact that both, I think it's fair to say, Chelsea and Spurs have equal sort of attacking potency, I guess. I do think that Solanke will kind of get off the ground. I noted that there was a criminal amount of big chances missed in the game by Solanke as well. But it won't be very long, I don't think, until Solanke does start to kind of go and run his chances, in my view. Yeah, I mean, Jackson versus Solanke, Sam, and anyone else potentially in that sort of mid-price forward bracket that you have considered?
Probably worth talking about Havertz as well. I think the only reason he's not in my side is because Arsenal's defence just looks so bloody good that it's just easier to get to them, and there are other good options up front that I also quite like. The Ødegaard injury obviously is a bit of an issue too, and it might mean that at times Havertz drops in. Sometimes I don't think we'll see that every week by any means, but it's just another bit of added context that maybe swings me slightly further towards the Arsenal double defense rather than double attack. And yeah, Solanke, I'm really, really interested in how he performs over the next few game weeks. They've got a good extended run of fixtures, so I plan on holding on to him for quite a while. And I do back Spurs' ability to create a lot of good chances for him, even though the data doesn't necessarily reflect it that much from his first game before the injury. I remember watching it and thinking he's very close to getting on the end of a lot of these. And if he got on the end of even one or two of them, they were going to be very high XG chances too. And obviously we saw a very high XG game in game week 5 for him too. I think he's close to some big hauls. And I think at his price, he's a bit of a bargain. So yeah, I prefer Solanke over Havertz, or definitely a Jackson for all the reasons you mentioned. Minutes, I think, will be managed a little bit, and he can be at times a little bit wasteful. So yeah, I'm all in on Solanke at the moment if I am going to have that more expensive attacker or that mid-priced attacker in there. But I thought Havertz was probably worth a mention too.
Yeah, definitely. I think we were both kind of looking at Havertz. I mean, at one point we were both kind of thinking, oh, we can just have Havertz as the main kind of Arsenal attacking outlet. But I mean, by the time that Saka's assisted 3 Gabriel and Saliba headers over the course of the next few weeks, I think we're probably going to be, I do like Havertz, and I think over Southampton and Leicester, I know it's all the way around the fixtures, isn't it? I wouldn't be too worried about him, but I would be potentially worried that in terms of minutes, I would be potentially worried that you might see Jesus playing them a bit further, and then Havertz kind of being pushed back to be used in midfield a little bit, and that might be something that would be in mind. I don't know. I've got no basis to say that beyond kind of just intuition from watching Arsenal, but it definitely does feel like that's enough to kind of just think, nah, it's just not worth it really on him. So you're a big fan of Woods. Let's leave the obvious jokes aside. I do like João Pedro. Honestly, I think he's a really, really good and interesting individual to kind of keep around. But I think the price of him is obviously reachable whenever you need him. But a very kind of third striker just to leave in your team, kind of talisman for Brighton. I think it's game week 12, their fixtures just become really, really good at the moment. In the short term, their fixtures aren't great. Calvert-Lewin, Vardy, we're talking about Nketiah, Mateus Cunha. What's the lab? Is he 5 or 5.5? I think he's 5.5, isn't he? Around that sort of level.
Yeah, if memory serves me correctly.
Yeah, I think he's 5.5. There's Strand Larson as well, who's another sort of pick me up later sort of thing. So I mean, for me, I looked at all of those players, and because you've got to have a cheap third striker, I think, to legitimate the fact that there's so many midfielders who are talisman elects and also kind of just week to week in terms of the fixtures make it work. So I've decided to go for a cheap third, and I think that that's going to remain the case. I've got Calvert-Lewin at the moment, but I don't think he's going to be staying in my team really very long. In fact, I don't think he's going to be getting the second rise by the looks of it, just because he obviously didn't score a goal against Leicester, which is obviously the way the transfer market works. We'll discuss in just a second. So at the moment, I'm kind of happy junking the third striker slot and kind of just pouring the money elsewhere. Yeah, any of these players strike your fancy? I know you've obviously got Woods. God, but anywhere else other than your massive erection, anywhere else, anything else in this area that is worth mentioning?
Well, if we ever wanted to monetize the pod, we've just lost it with that. So thank you for that, Tom.
Manscaping would be in touch immediately.
Quite like that. Yeah, that's a good shout. Yeah, so Chris Wood, I like the fixtures for the next 5 or 6 game weeks, and equally I dislike Brighton's fixtures for the next 5 or 6 game weeks in equal measure, meaning that I could have Chris Wood for a few weeks. Hopefully it pays off, and then make the move across to Pedro, and should be relatively comfortable on price for both of those if I wanted to. I am pretty close on DCL. I've been touting them a bit over a couple of game weeks now on my own shows. I do like him as a differential option. I just think that just that added bit of information that Chris Wood has penalties is big. And I think that shouldn't be underestimated. They've got a couple of really tricky wingers that will get into the box, that will induce tackles. And I think that hopefully in those home fixtures to come, some really nice home fixtures as well, they could win a couple and also create a lot of chances generally for Woods. So I really like him. I don't hate João Pedro, but looking at the fixtures, I'm not that hot on him. And for equal reason, I'm not that hot on Welbeck either. I know he's getting a lot of love at the moment. Not really that fussed about owning him. Outside of that, yeah, DCL is probably my second favourite in this price point. Yeah, there's not really a hell of a lot elsewhere that I would even consider right now. Cunha, once the fixtures turn good, I like generally as a player. I think he's a quality. Whether or not I can squeeze him in later on down the line is yet to be seen. But yeah, I'm very comfortable with Chris Wood right now.
Yeah, the only other one I'd maybe throw in is Raul Jimenez. If you really, you're making 3-4 transfers this week and you want like a vaguely cheap player, like the cost of his jib at the moment, but tough fixtures as per ESR we're coming into, but definitely seems to have kind of established himself over Hindi Monkey's embarrassing Muniz call from earlier on in the season.
Only takes one bag week though, I think, for Jimenez, and he could be out again. That's my only problem.
I wouldn't be touching that. Right. There we go. That's absolutely everything. It's not. We've missed out so much, I'm sure. But we've done our very best to try to go through it. We need to try to just do a quick preview now. We're 122 in. The first thing is, knee-jerk best transfers, bold claims, and the best captain for this week. The knee-jerk, is this simply wildcarding? I think we can give short shrift to this. I'm not sure it is knee-jerk. I mean, the original plan was kind of always sort of around this. For you, for me, it was more kind of keep my options open. But this kind of felt like, as we kind of grew into the season, the time that my team was running out of steam, and the time when I needed to make a few switcheroos, effectively from the starting lineup. And it would have always been nice to have started gangbusters and not really be thinking about a wild card right now. And I know that there's always going to be people out there who are not on wild card, just being like, well, I can get to a wild card-ish team with my free transfers, as in 3 rather than 3 transfers right now. But I don't know. I can't see a world, Sam, will look back on this and think it's a knee jerk, even if our original teams outscore our wildcard teams this week.
No, I don't think so. Anyone who's been listening to this or my other content for the last few weeks from the start of the season knows that I've been on a wildcard 6 plan from the start. And even if I wasn't, I would have ended up on one anyway. My team was getting very, very close to the brink. My bench was in tatters. I had a lot of players, even in my starting 11, that were starting to look very risky for their minutes. Yeah, and I also favoured the run of fixtures coming too. I knew that I picked a certain 11 or a certain 15 for those fixtures in the first 5 game weeks specifically. Those 5 weeks have now run out. So I don't think it's knee jerk. And I won't be looking back saying, oh, I realised my game week 5 would have scored, my side from pre-wildcard game week 5 would have scored better. Therefore, it was a bad decision. You have to bet. You can't just base things on the outcome. You've got to base it on the decision making going in as well, and on the information we had available at the time. So I think based on the information we've got available right now, I do think it's a good decision for my team, and I think your team as well to wildcard. Won't be the case for everyone, so do weigh it up on your own merit and your own side right now. But I think I specifically speaking for myself, really, really strongly needed a wild card, but with good reason that I set up for that exact structure running through to game week 5 and wild carding out of it. So no knee jerk for me.
Yeah, I bumbled into exactly the same thing. I'm going to call it skill, but it was complete luck. Yeah. Well, there we go. Right. To top transfer this week. Fair bit of activity surrounding the players who are in the zeitgeist for the wildcard, effectively. So we've definitely seen already over the course of the weekend that players like Luis Diaz, who's top sport player, unsurprisingly, 600,000 transfers for him. Gabriel, 500,000 transfers in for him too. Obviously, risen in price, and I don't think that's particularly concerning for anybody. And Bumo, I think the Brentford good fixtures are well signposted. Nick Jackson, I think off the base of 16 points last game. No one was talking about Nick Jackson before this week, and now they are. 413,000 transfers for him, and Raya, 268,000 transfers for him as well. As people getting bored of their goalkeepers. In terms of the goalkeepers being sold, it is Beck as Allison. I think it's 150,000 people started with Allison, so he's gone for Raya. In terms of the sales, I don't think there's actually that much concerning about this. So Isaac, 372,000 transfers out. Diogo Jota, no show. Could well be playing midweek, and it's one of those where you're kind of like, well, I mean, he was a good sort of initial punt, and it was very sort of close to him and Diaz to start the season. But I think even if I wasn't wildcarding, he'd be kind of high in mind for me to remove. João Pedro, quite a lot of people selling him. Assuming that's kind of a way to get to Jackson. I've noted that Stewart is actually due to rise tonight, apparently. But wow. I don't know whether that's wild cards or whether that's people looking for a player who has done something. But I mean, if you do a control F, which I've just done, that's kind of the level of research that we do on this pod these days. You don't see him anywhere in the transfers in. So I think a lot of that is wildcard action, to be honest. Gordon, 200,000 transfer out for him. Yeah, fair enough. And also Eze, 200,000 transfer out for him. Is there anything there that we kind of count as knee-jerky? I mean, maybe the Eze sales, like another blank, but equally, if he made more of that chance in second half, Sam, that isn't happening, is it, really? But it does feel like there's been kind of a very kind of clear fall-off in terms of kind of ownership and confidence in Eze. So maybe that's a bit more of an educated sort of knee-jerk, potentially, to sell him. I mean, if I wasn't wildcarding and I did own Eze, so 2 ifs, then I kind of wonder whether I would be kind of thinking about showing him the exit, especially with Everton away next.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still pretty hot on him, so maybe I'm a little bit too biased to comment on this one. But I like the fixtures over the next 6 just fine. I still think he's pretty talismanic to Crystal Palace, and they will, I think anyway, come good eventually. So yeah, I'm still fairly happy with him generally, but I can understand why people are getting rid, because there are a lot of good options, and he might be your way of easily getting across to Mbeumo as well. So that would be completely understandable, and I would definitely prefer Brian ahead of Eze at this point in time. So yeah, I can't really hate on that, but I think if you're on a wild card, he would definitely still be in my consideration, as he clearly is for me.
Yeah, Eze is actually the most transferred out midfielder throughout the course of the season, incredibly.
Wow.
Yeah. But there was a lot of preseason swell around Eze, wasn't there? Just because of the start and the talisman stuff, etc., and so on and so on. The way Crystal Palace ended last season and the nice price. I don't know. I can kind of understand why people are selling him, but equally, it's a bit of a Bruno effect almost. Like he's about to blow. He's about to explode. Yeah. No one in my wild card, but I'm glad he's in yours.
We'll see.
It was good to have difference in opinion. I mean, rather than that disparaging essay, which I wouldn't do. So the guy's an absolute fucking baller. Right, bold claims. Still 1-0 to Price, but nothing this week.
Nothing this week. I was fairly close, although it would have been disappointing having Captain Salah if he had blanked against Bournemouth. Obviously, only got the assist, but that's not good enough for me to win my bold claim this week.
Yeah, and mine was Vardy to have a party and score double digits versus Everton. I think he took a heavy knock early in the game. I don't know. I'm sure I saw that he'd taken like 3 shots before the game, and it was very sort of classic Vardy almost. That he was getting kind of the scavenger, Nick and I used to call him. That he gets like 1 shot and he scores it. I can see why there's a lot of interest on him for wildcard. Probably should have mentioned him a little bit more, and I can see why with the run of fixtures, people are thinking, oh, it's all right, he's worth doing, even though he's kind of advanced in age. There's actually less frequency, less sort of punishing. It wasn't the championship when midweek and the weekends on. So he's probably got more time to recuperate, have his Red Bull, go in his oxygen chamber, and could be a good option just to sit on the bench for this week and then come in for game week 7 if you've got a rotation sort of thing. I know they've got Bournemouth, Southampton, and Forest, and then Ipswich, so it's kind of 7 to 10 is pretty good. So I think he'll definitely be in thoughts for transfers after this week. I don't know. It's one of those where do I want to back a player from a rubbish side? Effectively, I don't know if Leicester are going to go down. I think Southampton will, sadly, Sam. I think probably Ipswich are going to make a good fist of it, and obviously Man City are going down 3rd. So it's difficult. But he's just, I don't know, he's just not kind of quite crossed my thoughts. So yeah, it's a shame it didn't quite happen versus Everton. I was tempted by the final sort of one last ride with Vardy, but equally I was quite glad to see it not happen because I didn't go there. And this week?
This week, it will be Salah and Diaz to both outscore Saka. So obviously, Saka's going to be a very popular captain. He is the transfer in for a lot of people and also a big part of the wild card for quite a few as well. So my bold claim is for the Liverpool players to basically spit in everyone's face and say, why are you getting rid? More so in Salah's case, but I thought I'd make it a bit more bold by adding in Diaz as well. So they both have to outscore Saka for this one to come through.
I've got memories of Sadio Mane scoring braces versus Wolves. I just feel like that was what he always did. I'm not sure why. I think that there's definitely a memorable final day when he did that, when that season when he was as good as Salah for the season. That was kind of 3 or 4 years ago. And Diaz is playing in that role. Is up against Semedo this week. I can definitely see the game state favouring him. And I don't even know who Salah would be up against. Aït-Nouri. So yeah, I can definitely see that happening, Sam, honestly. Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. I think you had to add both of them in to make it bold.
Yeah, it wasn't bold enough to
pass the Forest test. You couldn't just go on Salah's fast score Saka. I mean, that's just kind of, that could happen as a coin flip.
Yeah.
Cool. Mine is just pretty vanilla, really, for every wildcard week. My original team outscores my wildcard team. I'll have to do some maths, I think. I'll try to figure this one out. But I think there's definitely a reasonable expectation, Sam, that this, when it comes after, I think you're on M&F, aren't you? Is it Bournemouth for Southampton M&F this week?
That might be it. Yeah,
the old South Coast derby that no one actually cares about. People will say it's a derby. There's a massive rivalry, but Lucy was always saying,
not.
We don't care. Crap about them. Yeah, so that's always stay with me. But I'm sure that on Monday we'll both be kind of be sat there nursing our wounds, just being like, oh, I shouldn't have sold him, and maybe those who are saying we shouldn't have sold Salah are going to be delighting in the fact that your bold claim has gone well. But yeah, original team outscores the wildcard team is my bold claim. I think that's bold enough, to be honest, because of the way that we've both talked up our wildcard teams.
Yeah.
And then the final thing this week, best captains. So you would have noticed if you're watching on YouTube and worth kind of voicing that Sam and I both are different captains. Sam is sat on my boy Bukayo, and I'm sat on Erling Haaland, the robot, versus Newcastle. I think these are probably feasibly the only two players who are in the mix. No, that's not true, because Liverpool got Wolves away. So probably also you throw in Salah there.
Throwing Gabriel as well, another thunderbolt header. Yeah,
absolutely.
Easy.
While Face's hair is just going to get in his way, isn't it? And Saliba's going to pick up the scraps and score. You heard it here first. So yeah, you've got actually there's probably got Cole Palmer maybe against Brighton as well, who haven't didn't keep clean sheet last week for whatever reason. Yeah. Lots to talk about here. For wildcarders, it's probably going to be Haaland versus Saka, but Salah's in the mix as well. I'm just going to tip the robot, to be honest, and I'm really looking forward to Erling Haaland versus Dan Burn. That is going to just be the best mismatch I've ever seen from captaining him. I don't know if there's much sort of remnant anti-Haaland sentiment out there, really, apart from Andy Martin and James. I think most people are kind of there now. But yeah, I'm more than happy to just go with that. I mean, 71% ownership now. So the EO every time is just going to be like, you know what, I'm just going to go with that, get the game from Saka, and then just be happy and take captaincy out of the equation. Don't really care about it. Just know that it'll be all right. But you're on Saka.
Yeah. Bus team captain, it is very much a coin flip between the two of them at the moment. But like when sorting out your wild card, initially looking at that juicy home fixture against Leicester, it looks nice. So yeah, Saka just about. But I completely agree with everything you said about Haaland there. Looking at the matchup, and Newcastle defensively haven't exactly been brilliant yet either. I do like that a lot. And could easily end up going with him after a bit more research throughout the week too. He just looks absolutely unstoppable right now, to be very honest. So why not? Saka though, against promoted side, I did say going into game week 1 that I try to favour the home fixtures in 50-50 calls. I don't know if this is quite a 50-50 call, but it's very close to. So maybe I should just let my preseason instinct kick in, knowing that on average, the players with the home fixtures, especially against promoted sides, tend to do pretty well. And Saka has been close to hauling a few times and just never really quite gotten over the line there while still returning consistently. And I just wonder if at home to Leicester could be the week that he finally gets 2 or 3 returns in one and really starts exploding onto the scene. Definitely possible. It's also possible that they go 3-0 up after 45 minutes and he gets taken off at 60. So that's something else to consider. This is going to go down to the wire, and I would add in Salah to that if you have him as well, and as a very good option. The matchup is very nice against that left wing of Wolves. So yeah, I can see it being split. Haaland will probably be the most favoured captain just because he's absolutely inevitable so far.
Yeah, no, that's the way it is for me. There's absolutely no question about it for me, which is obviously very kind of just ham, water, and ready salted crisps on the Boots meal deal. I'm more than happy to just remove that as a decision that I've got to make this week in a myriad of decisions I've got to make this week when it comes to my wild card. So yeah, pretty fine with it, to be honest. But yeah, I mean, I'm more than happy if someone likes Salah, fancies Salah. Wolves no great shakes at all this year in terms of underlying data. I mean, it's so early. So where are you going to be with that? And also, if you really fancy Palmer or you really fancy Jackson, indeed against Brighton, then fine, go for it. Why not? All right, there we go. We've managed to make it through, Sam, in 1 hour 40, which isn't too bad. So final reminder of our teams. So I've got, in terms of the wildcards as it stands, Raya and Flecken. In defence, Trent, Pinnock, Gabriel, Milenkovic, could be Mikalenko, if I can't afford everything, and Davis. In midfield, I've got Bumo, Rogers, Foden, Saka, and Semenyo. And up front, it is Haaland, Solanke / Jackson, and Stewart.
Very nice. And my wild card as it stands is Flecken in goal with Valdemarson on the bench, Gabriel and Saliba as the Arsenal double up in defence, with Alexander-Arnold completing the three. On the bench, Davis and Fass as my fourth and fifth defenders. In the midfield, there's all five, but one of them benched would be Eze, Semenyo, Mbeumo, and Saka with the armband at the moment. Rogers on the bench away at Ipswich. The reason for that is I've also got three up top in the likes of Haaland, Solanke, and Chris Wood. So an 8-strong attack, a little bit more depth, but obviously a little less quality as well. So very interested to see how we change before the end of the week, of course, Tom. I'm sure there will be 1 or 2 changes, but it sounds like you're very set on the structure. And if I'm honest, I'm pretty set on my structure too. So there might be a few faces that change, but I think we're kind of close already, which is interesting to see.
Yeah, I'm very happy with that, honestly. I think it just feels like when you're in the final week pre-season, when you're looking at your team and you're kind of beyond, you've done all the thinking almost, or at least you thought quite in depth about all of the decisions, and you feel like you kind of got to a point in your decision tree. I haven't got a written down decision tree, but there's the trade-offs have kind of all been made. Despite the fact it's quite early in the week, I've had a bit of time to think about it, and I know that you, Sam, have been thinking about this since the start of the season. It definitely feels like we're fairly settled. There's a few kind of faces that can change, but yeah, I'm glad there's going to be differences. I'm glad that there's going to be potential swings effectively, and we aren't going to be corralled into a particular wild card. I mean, I'm probably going to spend a bit of time off Twitter this week, frankly. So I know that wildcard is going to be quite a strong topic of discussion. As you said in the past, it's quite a divisive thing, and so that's going to garner a lot of interest and push the top of my timeline. Like, it's almost like I don't want to see other people's wildcards, and I don't. Beyond kind of my trusted sources, I listen to you on this pod, listening to the people I mentioned, James, listen to Always Cheating, who I listen to, and a couple of others. I'm not going to really be interested in that many views, because at the end of the day, it only muddies the waters. And it's the mistake that I've made in the past, where I've kind of been too open to hearing kind of contrarian views, because it kind of just detracts from your thinking. And psychologically, it also kind of means that when all's said and done, when the dust settles, when the deadline's gone, if you're happy with the decisions you've made, I think that is kind of most of the battle won, honestly. You can't control the outcome, but you can control what you put into it. So yeah, it's good that we've discussed this, and it's also very good where we've sort of landed. It's not stubbornness, it's just kind of, it's just kind of having confidence in your own decision making, effectively. So yeah, these wildcards may inevitably change, but I feel like we've looked at it very well, and we've done a kind of a good sort of review of where the FPL season's at, and kind of the decisions we've made, I think, are all sound.
Yeah, good summary, Tom. And we hope that you guys out there have all really enjoyed listening to the show today. Hopefully you've gained a lot of information, whether or not you are on the wildcard this week. And as always, we really appreciate you tuning in. So thank you all for listening. We have been Who Got the Assist. You can find us on X at WGTA_FPL, or indeed myself at FPL Pricey, and on Instagram or Threads at WGTA.FPL, or again, I'm just FPL Pricey on there. If you did enjoy the pod, we'd really appreciate it if you could please follow us on those social channels, but also give the pod a 5-star rating wherever you're listening to it. Or of course, if you're watching along on YouTube, which I know a lot of you are right now live, then if you could leave a like and subscribe to the channel, that would be greatly appreciated as well. It really does help us out.
Yeah, thanks very much, Sam, for bringing your thoughts to this discussion. We hope you enjoyed the pod. We hope it assisted you plan your wildcards and your moves going forward if you're not on wildcards. Good luck to everybody over the next game week. We'll speak to you next week.
Oh, it's a goal. Who got the assist?